Hi, this is Justin Coletti. You may know me from Sonic Scoop, but today I'm in the Plugin Alliance channel, and we got a great treat. We are talking to the brain behind Brainworx, the founder of Plugin Alliance, Mr. Dirk Ulrich. Dirk, how are you doing today?
Hi, Justin. Thank you for having me.
All right, great to have you here. And the thing we want to talk about today is TMT, the tolerance modeling technology, your brainchild, this thing that you got a patent on that's really meant to more accurately emulate analog consoles, analog gear in general. And can you give us a little bit of sense for what TMT is, what it does, and what are some of the common misconceptions behind it?
Maybe I should take the chance to even say something about the myths of TMT that I see online all the time. The TMT means tolerance modeling technology, and it's a patent that I came up with a couple of years ago. And I've worked on it with two of our main engineers at that time at Brainworx. They're also part and listed in the patent, of course. The idea is that if you model one channel strip and you listen to the plugin versus the hardware, it sounds perfect. I mean, and we knew even back then when we modeled my Neve console in Germany that we were able to model an EQ and a compressor. But then I was sitting just like here. I had my computer on my Neve console in this case, and I was doing a test mix once we had the plugin done. And I was using like 60 or 70 channels on a pretty complex rock mix with some acoustic elements too. And that mix just didn't sound like the real desk, because I was able to do the very same mix on the real desk and on the laptop, sitting in the same spot with the same speakers, same room, same everything. And it just didn't have that dimension and width and depth. And a lot of people have talked about, of course, how, and they blame digital basically for it. Like digital never sounds as good and as wide as analog. And us being analog fans, but digital minds, of course, ultimately, we started investigating, and then I came up with this idea, well, in an analog desk, I even know that I'm always using my channel 21 for vocals, and I'm always using channel 7 for snare, because I like the step of that compressor better. And when I EQ a stereo pair of channels for doubled guitars or for synthesizers, I try to match them by ear, but then when we measured what I'd actually EQ'd, it was almost all over the place. I mean, of course, not plus minus 10 dB and tens of thousands of kilohertz apart from each other. But the curves, when you stack them, they didn't completely match. And so this is when we started thinking about why that is. And we introduced the realistic tolerances that components in analog gear basically have. And so if you're familiar with analog design, there's even parts that are rated 1% tolerances. Some are rated 2% tolerances, 10 or even up to 20%. And then the less tolerances in analog these components have, the more expensive they usually are. So analog companies, when they, for example, when they say mastering grade, that typically means that they're using mostly 1% and 2% tolerance parts to try and get as closely as possible to make two channels match, basically. And while they're aiming for this in analog, they will never completely get it perfect. And the funny thing is, for the human ear, it seems to be that perfect, which digitally you can achieve that really easy. I mean, you take any digital plugin and you cue 24 channels with the same frequencies, it will be exactly on the same spot, of course. It seems that that's not really what the analog, what the human ear wants to hear. So we figured that in our Neve console, for example, we figured that there's 150 components that contribute to the sound. And so we came up with this TMT and basically introduced these tolerances into that circuit. And we ignored the ones that would maybe control the brightness of LEDs or even the timing of mute buttons and stuff like this. I mean, that's something that doesn't really change the tone of the console too much. Now, some of the myths that I see online is people ask us all the time, why don't you make a plugin that's only the TMT so I can apply it to any other plugin? And that's just not how it works. You have to use the circuit even to hear and to feel the TMT, because if I set a plugin like this to everything zeroed out, basically, then the influence of TMT is almost zero. Of course, maybe you're using at least the high-pass and low-pass filters, and there's some noise generated in these console plugins which you can switch off if you don't like it. But in default setup, that's what it does. So there's already going to be small variances, but you couldn't just have a magic TMT plugin that you put on every channel and then you're using a BX Digital or FabFilter Digital EQ or something like this, and it would introduce tolerances, because after all, the TMT allows you to have a linked stereo compressor where the attack and release times are still slightly different on both channels, for the left and right, for example. And that's something you could try and mimic by using 2 mono channels and then maybe dialing in slightly different attack and release settings. But then that goes into everything. I mean, including even the, like I said, the noise and the center frequencies and everything in that circuit. So.
Right, to a degree, it's a bit interactive, so you will only hear a little bit of tolerance variation if everything within the strip is on bypass, but as soon as you start engaging the EQ, boosting the EQ, engaging the compressor, doing some compression, you get increasing buildup of tolerance differences the more parts of the plugin you'd use, and you couldn't really make it interactive like that, I'd imagine, after the fact with some plugin.
A few years ago, I did a presentation at a MixCon event in New York, and we were in a studio where we had beautiful speakers, and I showed that when I EQ'd some cymbals, a stereo set of cymbals, overheads basically, that if I used the EQ and boost really to, let's say, 10 or 12 dB in the high frequencies, which is of course not what you usually do on cymbals, but then you could even hear in the room the phasing that occurred from just these 2 channels being slightly different from the tolerances. Then when I dialed it back to, let's say, 3 dB of boost or 1 dB, then the effect is still there, but it's natural then. And that's literally what's happening when you're EQing 2 channels. You're trying with 2 hands to move the knobs the same amount, or even trying to do it by ear and making sure that everything sounds great. When you actually run some test tones through these channels later and see on a display what you've actually EQ'd, it's not very close usually. It's even your ears and the room. I mean, it could be all kinds of reasons for that, but you will not match 2 EQ curves completely perfectly.
All right. Thank you, Dirk. Great insights and information on TMT, tolerance modeling technology today. If you at home want to try out the tolerance modeling technology for yourself, it's in so many of the Brainworx and Plugin Alliance plugins. It's in the entire BX console line. You find it in this Shadow Hills mastering compressor. You find it inside the Kinephonium synthesizer, in the MasterDesk mastering solution. It's really all over the place in so many of these plugins. And you can try out any of them for free for 14 days over at plugin-alliance.com. That's plugin-alliance.com. Or just go ahead and get the mega subscription bundle where you get instant access to all of the Plugin Alliance and Brainworx plugins. Thanks again, Dirk. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. This has been Justin Coletti of Sonic Scoop, today on the Plugin Alliance channel. See you next time.